Hello, Scott here. I wanted to do a video about the ColorLight receiver cards people have been talking about on the Falcon forums and such. This is kind of my understanding about the ColorLight card, the receiver, senders. There's kind of some different parts and pieces to the whole system, but um, the receiver cards, it's kind of part of a bigger system. So these are designed and intended for if you were to have like an outdoor or indoor display at a stadium or some large display where you would have 100 panels or more on outside of outside of a building, and you want to control it through a computer or an HDMI device, company ColorLight makes a sender card, and you would have a sender card hooked up to an HDMI device or something sending out video. This sender card would convert it, has an Ethernet port, it would convert it to like Ethernet protocol, and then your display, let's say it's like 100 panels, would have multiple of these receiver cards on the back of it, daisy chain plugged in, receiving the data from the sender card, and then displaying the video on the screen. So that's kind of my understanding of what the intended use of these cards are. So how does that kind of, for us, we're just taking one of these cards and hooking it up to a small P10 or P5 device or P6, and it has 8 outputs, and so you can have like I have a 5x2 behind me, you can have an 8x12 all plugged in kind of. It doesn't really do um, the folding going back and forth, zigzagging as some call it, but this card though requires gigabyte Ethernet in, so you either need to have like a USB to gig Ethernet adapter plugged into your Pi or your computer, or you have to plug this device into a gigabit switch that then you plug into a 10100 adapter in your Pi or computer. So, and the device also has a kind of an FPGA configurable chip on it. So you have to use their software to configure the parameters of the ColorLight card and then send it to and save it to the card. So that's what I'm going to go over first here. This is kind of my setup. I currently have my computer has a gigabyte Ethernet adapter plugged into it, and then I have an Ethernet cable running from that to the ColorLight card behind me. If you could see, I have a Ethernet, or I have a panel behind me, a matrix behind me, and then I have the card plugged into that. So here's the setup of the screen that I have in the camera there. It's 5 panels high by 2 wide. They're P10 panels. They're 8th scan. The ColorLight card does do like 16th scan and 8th scan, and those are the ones I know about. Maybe there's more, but if you do the math, since each one of the P5 panels is 16 by 32, the matrix I have behind me is 80 pixels high by 64 wide, and then there's some other info here that we're going to need when we're configuring Xlights or FPP. It's BGR color order, and then the number of pixels and channels and how many universes, but we'll get back to that later. So first thing we're going to do is go into the LED Vision software and set up the display itself, the 80 by 64. So installed on my computer, I have LED Vision software. This is the software by they're the company that makes the ColorLight cards. So I'm using version 5.0. There is some other versions out there, but I've had the most success with 5.0. So that's what I recommend you use. So the first thing in here, it has kind of, you select the display. So how I was saying, this is for larger companies. You could have multiple displays configured in here, but I just have one. So you select and you go to screen control. And this kind of sets up, there's different types of senders. You could have a net card, which my understanding is it just sends data from your computer. So it would send, like on my screen here, I have this little box. It would send whatever video is showing in this box to the to your ColorLight output cards. So you could do like if you're doing like a presentation or, for playing, just using your computer to control a display, kind of like mapping or what you can do in Xlights. So in here, you have to set up kind of the size of this box. So I set it up to the size of my display. So 64 by 80 is what I said earlier. So it'll make the box a little smaller, but it's kind of not important. It's just the representation on your computer right now. Later when we're using it, this doesn't really matter. So if you go into the LED screen settings, its password is 168168. So I'll say there's a little warning here saying, hey, parameters, configuring it. So this is kind of where you set up like your display that you wanna show pictures and stuff on. So if you were in a setup where you had 20 cards or something like that, like a huge display with hundreds of panels, you would plug them all in, daisy chain them together, and you would go through here and configure all the individual cards, how many panels are plugged into each card. Well, I only have one card and I only have 10 panels plugged into it. So I do detect receiver card, it just shows one receiver card because that's all I have plugged in. Like FPP right now only supports 1 or 2, so there are ways to do multiple, but my panel's not big enough that I have to worry about that. So for just one panel, for a small panel, just one receiver card is needed. So it's detecting it, so it should be good. So in screen parameters here, this is kind of where you set up your screen or your receiver card for your specific panel. So there's lots of options. I normally don't play with too many of them. But if you were to, like in the Falcon forums, there's files for configuration for different panels. There's this load button and these RCVBP files that people have been kind of passing around. You would load that for your P5 or P10, depending on what one you're configuring, and that'll kind of preload some of the configuration for you. I'm using a P10s, and I've had pretty good success if I just, they have these predefined ones. If I just go to general, full color, I go full color 8 scan because I have 1/8 scan panels. So I select that, and if you look at the picture, it's pretty close to being right. But they still have this auto configuration wizard that I want to go through, and it'll make sure everything is configured right. So up here there's settings for your display. So I always 64 was the width I said by 80 high. So that'll that gives you the boundaries of it. And then down here there's intelligent settings. And when you click this, it kind of pops up with a wizard that you step through to configure your panels, like color order, rows, and everything, like pixels per row. And so if you had like multiple ColorLight cards and stuff, you would have to change things. But for kind of a standard setup with just one ColorLight card, I normally just do, this is the width of my panel, so 64 here, and I don't touch anything else. There are settings for like different types of chips on panels, but I just leave the default. Normally all I do is change the width here. And then you hit next, and I'll start cycling through like patterns on your display to see if it's to configure everything. So 1, it says displays black, 2 displays white. So looking at the panel, 1 displays black, 2 displays white. That looks correct to me. Second one here, 1 is darker than 2. So 1, and then 2 is a little brighter, so looks correct. And then right here, it's going to cycle through colors. Red, blue, green, and then black. So looks right. So how many rows are lit up? If I look at the panel, looks like the first 8 are lit up. So that looks right. How many are lit up now? 1 to 8. And kind of my understanding with those numbers, that's like the scan width of your panel. I only have 1/8, so that's all I've ever set up. So I've always seen this. It's a 1/8. So this screen is kind of like the mapping table, or they call it the route table. But basically, it's to say where the pixels are on the screen. So maybe if you had your screen upside down or something crazy, but I just kind of keep the standard configuration here. So they'll start flashing pixels on the display, and you have to click in the box where you want it to see. So right now it's doing the top left, so that's 1. Now it's flashing a second pixel, that's 2. It kind of just goes down the row here. I have found with this display, if you click and drag, it will let you do that. You gotta be pretty good with a mouse or you'll screw up. And if you do like mess one of these up, there is a reset and a back where it'll undo your selection. That's the only real way I know to reset it. But just gotta go down the line here. And this should be basically the full width of your panel. So 64, that's what we said earlier. If it's not at first option, you probably forgot to change in the wizard. So you might have to go back a ways and make sure you put the width of your panel. So once you get to the end of the first row here, now it just starts flashing the whole second row. So since you did the order of the first row, it kind of assumes it's going to be that way for the rest of them. So now it just needs to do like the top down order. So you just click the second row and it'll put 65. In the third row will flash and you click that one, so on and so forth. So you basically click all 8 and you should get a thing like you're finished. And looking at my panel, it looks like it's showing on the screen what's mapped on my computer here. And it looks pretty correct to me, if you see. So just hit OK and finish, and it looks like everything's configured. So there is a third tab here, and this is kind of like your receiver mapping. So as I was saying, if you had multiple receivers, which the FPP and most of this stuff doesn't support at this point, it does like 1 or 2. But if you were like in a stadium scenario or a large display, you would have, if you had multiple of these, you would set kind of the data order where they're plugged into each other. But for mine, I just have 1. So column count, row count just set to 1. And then the width and the heights, I set at the panel width and height. So 64 by 80. So that was what my panel is. So once you have all these kind of done, you just did the configuration on the computer. It's just, you can save it. So if you want to save what you just did, so you have, future reference if you ever need to reconfigure, you can just load it again. You don't have to do all the steps. Save it, that would save it to your computer, but then you also have to save it to the receiver. So like I was saying, the receiver has memory in it, like an FPGA type device. So you need to save to the receiver, and you see the little progress bar on the bottom here. It's sending the data to the receiver card. So that's kind of all for the LED Vision software. We have it all set up, and it looks like it's working. Kind of this is the first step. If you can't get your panel working in here and looking correct, you're never gonna be able to get it to work in like Xlights or FPP. So this is kind of a critical thing to get it working in here. So I'll just close the LED Vision software and everything goes away. So that's the first step. So the next thing I'm going to do is configure Xlights for my P10 display. So I'll open it up here. I just have a fresh folder. If we go back to this, I said it was 80 by 60, so we're going to set up a panel that's 80 high by 64, or a matrix in Xlights, 80 by 64. It's a BGR color order, and then there's total channels and universes we'll have to add here once we get it set up. So let's just create a new matrix. So number of strings, that is the height of it. And then nodes per string is the width. And with the ColorLight boards, and I think P10s in general, you want to go to top left for your starting location. So that's kind of all you have to do. If you look, the start channel is 1 to 15,360. So based on what I determined earlier, if you do the math of 80 by 64, that's 5,120 total pixels. And then 3 channels per pixels, that gets you 15,360 pixels. So Xlights is doing the math how we are. And with a P10 panel, each panel is 16 by 32 pixels. If you do, that is 512 LEDs. So each P10 panel has 512. So kind of a rule of thumb is each P10 panel, if you do 512 channels per universe, each panel is 3 universes. So I have 10 panels, that'll be 30 universes if I do. So that's why it's kind of easier to do 512 channels or channels per universe when you do P10s. So so that's kind of the basic, but how I'm going to use this with Xlights, and I don't know if I'm going to do this once I run the show, but for right now, for testing and debugging, the ColorLight card kind of takes this low-level Ethernet protocol. It's not natively supported in Xlights, and that's why people use FPP. That'll do the conversion for you. Well, I wrote an application that I can run on my PC that'll convert E131 data to this low-level ColorLight data. So in Xlights, I'll set up E131 outputs, and then my application will be running on the same computer, and it'll output to the ColorLight card. So the first thing I do is go into Xlights and set up an E131 output. So because I'm running the application that's going to listen for the E131 on my computer, I'm just going to do a software loopback, which is 127.0.0.1. So starting universe, just because I go by like the 100 systems, I'm going to start at 100. And based on my slides, I need 30 universes because 10 panels, 3 universes per panel, so 30 total. And I want to go to 512 per universe. I'll put just a description of P10. So it added universes 100 through 129. If you look, the last channel is 15,360. If I go to my layout, is 15,360. So everything in Xlights looks like it's set up right at the moment. So let's minimize that. So the next thing we need to configure is this little application that I wrote. So I have it on my computer here. I have it in GitHub, and I can give it to anyone to try. But it needs to be run as an administrator just because of the data is like low level. It has a driver in Windows. So currently my application is Windows only, but to get it to work with the Ethernet adapter and the ColorLight card, you have to run as administrator. So there are some basic configuration, and this is stored in a file. So every time you load it, it'll load your previous time. So because it's kind of doing, since this application is doing an E131 conversion, you have to do an input. So what network interface you want it to listen on. So since I'm running Xlights and this on the same computer, I'm just doing the software loopback. So 127.0.0.1, and that's what I set up in Xlights as well. And then I need to set the device that I want the ColorLight data to go out to. So I have that USB to Ethernet adapter plugged into my ColorLight card. I have that selected. So that's the first couple. And then I need to set what E131 universes to listen on. So in Xlights, I set up 100, and there's 30 universes, so it'll calculate so down here you set the universe size 512, and it'll automatically figure out the end universe based on the pixel or the panel or your matrix size stuff you put down here. So I put 80 by 64, that's the size of my matrix, and it calculated that it needs to go from universe 100 to 129 based on the universe size of 512. And then the last setting is data refresh, which is just kind of how fast the panel or how fast the application sends data to the panel. It's 15 milliseconds, which is like 20 frames faster than 20 frames per second right now. So I just leave that as is. Just save it, and the next time you load it, it'll just keep loading those same settings. So that's why I didn't have to change anything. But so now in Xlights, this in theory should send out E131 data. My application will convert it and then send it to the ColorLight card, kind of how I have in my thing here in my PowerPoint. Then the last thing I want to check is I need to change string properties in here. So this application is just doing a one-to-one. So if you're using like FPP, you would just change your node layout in FPP. But since this is just doing a one-to-one conversion, I actually got to change it in Xlights. So my slide earlier, I said it's BGR is the panel type I have. So I need to go in here and go to their BGR nodes. So now when I put something on the screen here, it should So looking at the display behind me, it's currently showing garbage on there. So I must have not saved the ColorLight configuration to it, maybe. I don't know what's going on there. So let's just ignore that for a second and see if it works. So I got the my software running. I've got Xlights here. Let's do a new sequence, standard thing. Let's just throw the old classic butterfly on there and output the lights and see what happens. So I don't know what was up with the garbage being sent on it earlier, but now that I'm outputting the lights, it seems to, everything seems to be okay. So that's kind of, I guess, a basic 101 on how to set up a ColorLight card with Xlights, my little E131 app, and the LED Vision ColorLight card, the settings and everything. If you have any questions, let me know. You can hit me up on Facebook, or I could jump in a Zoom call and help anyone out that needs help with their configurations. So yeah, thanks for watching.